Did you know that 23 million Americans ages 12 and over suffer from drug and/or alcohol addiction? For many years, I too was in a drug addiction. And I'm willing to bet that every single one of you, if you think long and hard enough, can find someone in your own life who is still actively suffering. For so long, I thought I was defected. And then I was informed that I had the disease. A disease in which I had to follow and maintain a suitable treatment plan. A disease in which today I am able to say that I have recovered from. Today I hope to convince you of this aspect. I hope through my presentation that you can clearly see that addiction is a disease of the brain. I'm going to pose two arguments that clearly reinforce this theory. The first being that substance abuse causes change and damage to the brain. And the second, that addiction has a biological allergy to drugs and alcohol. Then I'm going to talk about how you can help, and how recognizing this aspect of disease, of an addiction being a disease, can really alleviate the negative stigma that's associated around it. Going into my first argument, drug and alcohol addiction results in change and damage to the brain, causing the inability to avoid compulsion. This poses the argument. Many people like to say that addiction is a choice, that it's a lack of moral principles or a lack of willpower. But before I go further into my rebuttal, let me ask you this. For the person who goes and has unprotected sex and acquires an STD, is that not a disease? Or the person who's a chronic smoker and later obtains lung cancer, is that not a disease? Dr. Raju Ajela, the president of Medical Directors of Health Upwardly Mobile, Inc., is quoted in an article called "Addiction is now defined as a brain disorder, not a behavior problem." He states, "Addiction is not a choice. Addictive behaviors are a manifestation of the disease, not a cause." Going further into my research, I read an article by the National Institute of Drugs and Alcohol. And in this article called "Drugs, Brains, and Behaviors," it talks about how drugs and alcohol target the brain's reward system, flooding it with 2 to 10 times more dopamine than a healthy, non-addictive brain. These euphoric effects strongly enforce the behavior of use, teaching the user to repeat, consequently creating a habit. Addiction is born. Now I'm going to move on to my second argument. Addiction has a biological allergy to drugs and alcohol. This brings on the question, if addiction is a disease, then why can some safely use drugs or alcohol without becoming infected? Well, it's just like someone who has a nut allergy. They cannot successfully eat nuts without having a negative side effect. Addicts who drink or use drugs break out in negative side effects, and they usually end up in jails, mental institutions, or even worse, death. Now I'd like to talk to you about how you can help. And that how recognizing this concept of addiction being a disease can truly alleviate the negative stigma that's associated around it. The disease model provides the hope recovery exists. It allows the addict to relieve the guilt of feeling like a bad or morally inferior person, giving them something to fight for other than themselves. It relieves the family or loved ones of feeling responsible for the addict being this way. And it encourages others to maintain a social network that provides support for the addict and the loved ones who are still suffering. So, today I've provided you with the information to clearly reinforce my theory that addiction is a disease. I gave you two arguments that reinforce this theory. First being that substance abuse causes damage and change to the brain. And the second, that addiction has a biological allergy to drugs and alcohol. Then I addressed how you can help. And that by recognizing addiction as the disease that it is, really can alleviate the negative stigma that's associated around it. Addiction probably can't be wiped out entirely. But hopefully by recognizing this concept of addiction as a disease, if you or anyone you know are suffering, then you can see the addict as a sick person and not a villain. The addict is not irrevocably broken, and they are not alone. With a disease, there is recovery. In closing, I want to quote Dr. Michael Miller from the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And he states, at its core, addiction isn't just a social problem or a moral problem or a criminal problem. It's a brain problem whose behaviors manifest in all these areas. Thank you.